6ix9ine and recently sat down with a dancer project for an interview, and things took a wild turn when Fat Joe's name came up. The conversation quickly spiraled from casual to explosive as 6ix9ine began calling out Fat Joe directly, exposing details that shocked both fans and critics. According to 6ix9ine, Fat Joe has spent years publicly dissing him, portraying himself as a moral authority on loyalty and street ethics while hiding behind a false image. Fat Joe has called him out multiple times, labeling him one of the biggest rats in hip-hop. But this time, 6ix9ine wasn't holding back. He fired back with full energy, challenging Fat Joe's credibility and even bringing up old controversies that had long been buried. Fat Joe has been vocal about his disdain for 6ix9ine ever since the rapper's infamous trial and cooperation with authorities. Over the years, Joe has used interviews to criticize him, calling him names and questioning his integrity. In one interview with Math Hoffa, Fat Joe didn't mince words, calling 6ix9ine a sucker and expressing that he couldn't respect what he represented. He recalled how he once warned 6ix9ine about the dangers of the path he was on, trying to steer him away from legal trouble. But according to Joe, 6ix9ine brushed it off. He even said that when they met off camera, 6ix9ine claimed his gangster persona was just an act, a front for entertainment. Fat Joe later said that lie made him lose all respect for him. Over time, Joe continued to speak on 6ix9ine in a situation, labeling him a top-tier snitch in hip-hop history, comparing him to infamous figures like Alpo and Sammy the Bull. He suggested that 6ix9ine broke an unspoken code in the culture and made it acceptable to betray your crew if it meant saving yourself. But that raised a question: should street rules even apply to hip-hop anymore? 6ix9ine and his defenders argue that most people who listen to rap today aren't from the streets. They're suburban kids, fans who enjoy the art but have no connection to street life. If most of the audience doesn't live by those codes, why should those rules dictate what's acceptable in the industry? 6ix9ine himself echoed this sentiment during the interview, saying that the so-called street code doesn't match the reality of modern hip-hop culture. He pointed out that at big rap shows, the majority of the crowd isn't even black or from the hood. So why should the behavior of artists be judged by codes their audience doesn't live by? Fat Joe, on the other hand, has made it clear that he believes in upholding those codes. He's repeatedly spoken about honor, loyalty, and integrity as cornerstones of the culture. But 6ix9ine sees hypocrisy in that stance. During the interview, he said that Fat Joe was acting like the prime minister of hip-hop, pretending to be the moral compass of the game while ignoring his own flaws. He even mocked Joe by saying if he was the rat leader, then Fat Joe must be the cap leader for spreading lies and exaggerations. 6ix9ine accused Joe of being fake, saying even Joe's close friends like Jadakiss don't believe half of what he says. He used humor and sarcasm to turn Joe's criticism into a moment of self-exposure, claiming Joe hides behind fake morals and public posturing. But what really made the interview explode was when 6ix9ine shifted the conversation toward Big Pun's family. This part hit deep because it's not about rap beef, it's about loyalty, something Fat Joe often preaches. 6ix9ine brought up how Fat Joe had been accused for years of not properly taking care of Big Pun's family after his death, despite Pun being one of Joe's closest friends and collaborators. According to Big Pun's wife, Liza Rios, Fat Joe withheld royalties that rightfully belonged to her and her children. The issue became serious enough that she filed a lawsuit against him, claiming that while Pun's music was still earning money, none of that income was being passed to his family. Fat Joe denied wrongdoing, saying he had actually helped them and even gave them money out of his own pocket. He claimed he secured $1 million deal for Big Pun's family and that they eventually ran through the money. But Liza Rios publicly disputed that, saying they never saw the money Joe claimed to have given. That's when the lawsuit came into play, forcing both sides to bring legal arguments to court. Fat Joe's team tried to get the case dismissed, not by saying they didn't owe money, but on technical grounds, claiming Liza couldn't sue under certain terms. Still, her lawyers argued that Joe had fiduciary duties, meaning a legal responsibility to make sure Big Pun's family received the royalties they were owed. The heart of the case was simple: where did the money go? When 6ix9ine brought this up, it wasn't just a random diss, it was a strategic blow. He knew this was one of Fat Joe's most sensitive subjects, one that questioned the very values Joe claims to stand for. 6ix9ine argued that if Joe talks about honor and loyalty so much, then he should have taken care of his late friend's family before lecturing others about the street code. He said it's one thing to criticize someone for cooperating with the feds, but it's another thing entirely to allegedly deprive your friend's widow and kids of their rightful earnings. To 6ix9ine, that kind of betrayal is far worse than snitching. The allegations around Big Pun's royalties have lingered for years in hip-hop circles. While some fans defend Fat Joe, saying the business side can get messy, others believe Liza's version of events, pointing to public records and the lawsuit as proof that something wasn't right. 6ix9ine used that gray area to his advantage, shining a spotlight on the cracks in Joe's reputation. For someone who has spent years branding himself as the voice of integrity in hip-hop, being accused of betraying your fallen friend's family hits hard. As the interview went on, 6ix9ine flipped the conversation from personal attacks to cultural critique. He said Fat Joe's obsession with the street code is outdated, especially in an era where hip-hop has gone global. Most fans aren't gangsters, and most rappers today are businessmen or entertainers first. He argued that Joe and others like him keep dragging old-school ideas into a world that's already moved on. Back in the day, the street code might have made sense when rap was still deeply tied to neighborhood culture, but now with streaming, sponsorships, and international audiences, those lines are blurry. 6ix9ine believes people like Fat Joe use the code more as a weapon to judge others than as a genuine moral guide. He also turned the tables by pointing out how people pick and choose when to apply those rules. If loyalty and respect are so important, then why don't those same principles apply when it comes to business, friendships, and helping families? He accused Joe of using the street code to look righteous while ignoring it when it's inconvenient. In 6ix9ine's view, the whole idea of loyalty in hip-hop has become performative, a talking point more than a reality. Fat Joe, for his part, has always claimed that his words come from experience, not hypocrisy. He says he lived through that era when snitching could destroy someone's reputation, and that the culture lost its moral center when people started excusing it. In one of his recent interviews, Joe talked about how the shift in hip-hop began when people started allowing rats to still thrive in the game, saying it broke the code completely. He blamed 6ix9ine for setting that trend and said the culture hasn't been the same since. 6ix9ine recently sat down with a dancer project for an interview, and things took a wild turn when Fat Joe's name came up. The conversation quickly spiraled from casual to explosive as 6ix9ine began calling out Fat Joe directly, exposing details that shocked both fans and critics. According to 6ix9ine, Fat Joe has spent years publicly dissing him, portraying himself as a moral authority on loyalty and street ethics while hiding behind a false image. Fat Joe has called him out multiple times, labeling him one of the biggest rats in hip-hop. But this time, 6ix9ine wasn't holding back. He fired back with full energy, challenging Fat Joe's credibility and even bringing up old controversies that had long been buried. Fat Joe has been vocal about his disdain for 6ix9ine ever since the rapper's infamous trial and cooperation with authorities. Over the years, Joe has used interviews to criticize him, calling him names and questioning his integrity. In one interview with Math Hoffa, Fat Joe didn't mince words, calling 6ix9ine a sucker and expressing that he couldn't respect what